I'm Jeremy Thomas, class of 2021, and this is Justin Berry. He is class of 2018,
Mhm.
and we just want to talk a bit about Amherst Uprising. Uh, so when did you first hear about Amherst Uprising?
Yeah, so the event happened during my sophomore fall, and it didn't have the name Amherst Uprising when it first started. I remember it must have been a Wednesday night, maybe a Thursday night. I was on Facebook, and there was an event that people had started and been inviting people to. Believe it was a blackout in solidarity with students at Mizzou, where they had been having some sit-ins as a result of some racial tensions on their campus. I think specifically the football team had started getting involved and was starting to blow up, and other colleges were having shows of solidarity. And I remember reading about what was going on and thinking, like, wow, this is stuff that's really important to be a part of these conversations, show some solidarity here. They're dealing with really difficult challenges on their campus. And it was, I think, starting maybe around noon or early afternoon the next day. And so I had my black shirt, went to Frost where we were going to have to sit in. There's a couple of classmates of mine who I didn't know well who were organizing it. Um, I remember, again, it started with this show of solidarity for these other students at other campuses. Um, but it pretty quickly turned into kind of tying in the challenges that they were bringing attention to some of the challenges students have on this campus here at Amherst. And people started sharing a lot of their experiences. And it kind of quickly escalated to, like, let's look more critically and give voice to some of the challenges that students have on this Amherst College campus, especially people of color, Black students. It was three Black women who started it, but it quickly kind of expanded to a more general feelings of marginalization and racial tensions, especially on campus, as well as other identities that complicated that. And so I was there from the beginning when it first started as the show of solidarity and saw it then become like very Amherst specific. And when it really became the uprising is when people started more and more people coming to the campus as people realized this was going to be a really big moment for the student body. More people starting to talk about their experiences, both individual and groups they were a part of. Professors started bringing their classes. People were texting their friends to come by, and it was a huge amount of the campus that was there. President Biddy Martin, who was heading to Japan at the time, had decided to cancel her trip to meet with people at Doshisha University when she realized that there was a need for more of an administrator presence, especially her as the president of the school. And so once she got there, it was clear that this was going to be a big event. And I think that it was soon after that people started referring to it as Amherst Uprising, as kind of this bringing forward a lot of stuff that I think had been to some degree bubbling under the surface beforehand. I think that a lot of people on campus knew that there were challenges, especially around being people of color on this campus. But there hadn't been a way that it had captured the attention of the whole student body to this degree, at least that I knew of. Obviously, I was in my third semester on campus, so I had a limited understanding of this. But I think something that I remember that I think is important to have a part of the context of Amherst Uprising was that the year before, and I forget if it was the fall or the spring semester, the school had tried to have a day of dialogue happen where classes were canceled and everyone on campus was invited to meet in the gym. They had some speakers give a short panel presentation and then break out into smaller groups facilitated by faculty to talk specifically about racial issues on the country going on in the country. This was around the time that the Black Lives Matter movement was first starting. It was after a series of police shootings of young black men, black boys too, I think. Um, and so the school realized there was a conversation that should happen around this, but it wasn't a very effective day. I remember being in that small group, one feeling like myself, I didn't have the language to talk about and understand and have an exchange with people for what was going on. Where I was interested in learning but didn't know how to do that in a productive way. And also, these groups, there were people there who were happy to participate, but it wasn't particularly productive. I remember afterwards talking with other classmates who had been there who felt even more strongly that it had been to some degree a waste of time. And I think some people that was like coming from a place of thoughtlessness about what was going on, but it was also disappointing for a lot of people who wanted to talk about these issues and
Right.
people who, much more than myself, were prepared to do it and felt like that there was a need for this, but we didn't have spaces. And so Amherst Uprising was a really organic way that I think that this happened, where again, this kind of bubbling under the surface of this need to give a voice to some experiences that hadn't been acknowledged by other students or the administration in a way that people felt um, seen. And it just happened organically, which was incredible. It was emotional for a lot of people. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of where it came out of and when it became an uprising of student voices, where people were there to listen, to talk, to participate, um, and yeah, show solidarity both initially to students on other campuses, but then to students in our community. It was really powerful.
So I think you said something along the lines of um, student voices that previously felt disacknowledged, or sort of like the impetus um, coming from the dialogue coming up to the uprising. Do you and if so, in what ways do you feel like uprising created sort of acknowledgement of those sort of like student voices that you mentioned before?
Yeah, I mean, like just initially, or as kind of a big thing, was that it was a time where such a significant part of the student body was in one place. Like that doesn't happen very often at Amherst, and when it does, it's over things like food at our seasonal festivals or our farm fests, which are
Yeah.
great times, but it's not a sharing of other experiences besides what happens in that moment.
Right.
Just having a library packed was, I think, a way that people physically heard stories of other students,
Got it.
right? And feeling the power and the emotion in that room, it was impossible not to be captivated by it. And I remember I wasn't someone who was going to go up and talk, but just sitting there for hours listening to other people share snippets of their experiences, from seniors who've been there for 4 years, who had a lot to talk about, to people in their first semester at campus who were just overwhelmed by being there in that moment, talking about the excitement of coming to a place like Amherst with all the promise that's there, and then some of the challenges they had faced. Or even talking to people on the side of, at that time, I was a resident counselor in one of the first year dorms.
Where were
So
you resident counselor?
I was a resident counselor in James, second floor. If anyone out there, it's James, second floor. It was a great time. Loved everyone. Um, and as a resident counselor, you get to know a lot of diverse communities, right? Because our first year floors are probably the most mixed groups of students we have on this campus. Um, and so remember, having a sense of like what their experiences are like. Some people coming from far away with different challenges, but this was midway through the fall semester, so pretty early on in people's time at Amherst. I remember talking to them afterwards of like, what was this like as first year students? You're just getting to this campus. It's still for a lot of people kind of the honeymoon phase of being at Amherst, right? Like college is exciting. This is fun. There's so much to
There's
do.
farm fest, there's fall fest.
Exactly. There's challenges. I think every student, regardless of where you're coming from, has some amount of adjustment and kind of disorientation there. But I think for a lot of students, that first semester is a really exciting time where that outweighs a lot of the challenges. Of course, not for everyone, but for a lot of people. I remember talking to them about like, what was it like seeing all of this when you've just been here for a couple months? And a lot of them were taken aback. Most of them were of like, wow, I didn't realize like it was so hard for so many people here. Like I haven't had that challenge yet. Like I people were saying like from my identity, like I have a lot in common. These people were saying they've had a really, really difficult time at Amherst, and so far my time has been great. And like, is this really what's coming? And kind of like that conversation really escalating quickly. And I think having spaces where those experiences were passed down from seniors to first years to sophomores to juniors.
Right.
I know that that's something, from even my time on campus last year that happens a good amount, but I think there was definitely less of that at the time of Amherst Uprising. I know that a lot of affinity spaces have grown since then. And, even if they had some foundation before Amherst Uprising, um, it was really a push after that to be more intentional about engaging people. And I think more people interested in being a part of that, even before they realize, like, I really need this space, but thinking, like, okay, I want to be a part of these conversations. I want to have these connections for the potential that it is going to be harder, or just to build community around that. Um, I know myself, like getting involved with the student athletes of color group at the time, which was just starting out, but that was a group that really got its momentum after Amherst Uprising. And that was a group I probably wouldn't have been a part of if it hadn't been for the conversations happening at Amherst Uprising. That's a group that's now goes by CACSAC, Council of Amherst College Student Athletes of Color. Um, and yeah, being a part of those conversations then of I think understanding what it meant to be a person of color on this campus in athletic spaces, just as a student, and feeling that I had a place to participate in those conversations. I think that wasn't something I necessarily thought of the same way before Amherst Uprising or felt a need to do. But seeing that sense of community and the value of it and feeling like that'd be something that'd be important for me to be a part of, I think is something that personally came out of that for me. Um, yeah, I think around the athletics community, because I was a member of the cross country and track teams my 4 years here at Amherst, um, that was something that also came up in the uprising. As we know, our athletic teams are less diverse than the rest of our student body. Um, and so being a part of kind of both experiences of being a part of the athletic community, also being there in the space of Amherst Uprising, being a student athlete of color, again, figuring out what that meant and how I was included in that too during this time. As the experience shifted from, you know, acknowledging the experiences of students, the challenges they face, those conversations, to thinking about what are tangible things we think we need to push to change going forward, both short term and long term. Um, One of the big tangible ones that was easy to point out was let's make it so we change the mascot now.
Right.
I think there was a sense around a lot of the campus. It was inevitable. It was going to change. The student government, I think, was going through the process of setting up a vote sometime soon that would give some data to the fact that students wanted to change the mascot. It was like, if we know this is going to happen, let's just do this now. And at the time, the conversation was the athletes don't want to do that, right? The athletes are the ones who want to keep it Lord Jeff, the rest of the student body, especially people in this space in Frost, where there weren't as many athletes visibly there, was okay, we're at odds here. And I remember realizing, like, as someone who was a part of athletic teams, that yes, there were athletes who really felt strongly connected to Lord Jeff, but there were a lot of people who didn't.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people in that room who I was talking to um, who also I knew wanted to change the mascot. And I remember feeling like this was a place where I could help, bring my voice to this, of helping connect some of these other athletes and help us take a stand against the mascot and realize that we're a part of this uprising too. And so we talked to a couple people I knew who were there peripherally. Brianna Cook, who was upperclassman on the softball team, and Harrison Highgood, another track person who I was friends with throughout my time at Amherst. And there were some conversations happening over the next couple of days of like, what can we do, action items for getting this mascot thing going? And as I was a part of some of those conversations, I had the idea of going up to them and being like, there had been some posters around campus recently around like spaces for queer students around campus. I think some of them are still up around the gym of like the football field is a safe space with particularly for queer students, with some athletes there with a picture saying like, we're taking a stand, we're putting our faces on this poster to make a point like we will be welcoming students. I thought like that was a really thoughtful way to do it, of like putting people's face on the poster. And so yeah, I approached them with this idea like, what if we reached out to a lot of other sports teams, knowing that there are people who want to be a part of this but don't really have a way to do it, or don't feel comfortable doing this, and get them to take a picture saying we are for changing the mascot. We're against being Lord Jeffs. You don't have to say what you want to be, whether it's the moose, which was controversial for whatever reason, or anything else. And let's see if there's people interested in doing this, and take a picture as a group of athletes saying like, we are athletes who are against being Lord Jeff, and let's change the narrative a bit here. And that ended up being really successful. We got, I think there's a picture, and hopefully I can pass it along as a part of this project, of it was almost like it was over 100 athletes who showed up to the front of Frost to take this picture saying we're against Lord Jeff mascot. I think that was a moment where if that hadn't happened, if we hadn't stepped up to be like, let's get that involved in this, there was a lot of tension over athletes not being part of this Amherst Uprising conversation. And again, having been in that community, knowing that, of course, there are people who aren't engaged in this, but there are a lot of people who are, and they aren't visible, and they aren't finding ways to get involved in this conversation. So how can I and these other people step up to make this happen? And then when the referendum, which was accelerated, happened a week later on, do we want to be Lord Jeffs? I think it was overwhelming, like 85% of people voted against it. And I don't think that would have happened if we hadn't been a part of that during the uprising. It was really incredible how many people were there, right? There were, I'm sure, people who were there kind of half-heartedly of like, oh, someone told me I need to be here, stop by. I remember, seeing some of the people there were kind of laughing, people were sharing, like, that was bad, like it's not a perfect community. I think that that's important to acknowledge that, this wasn't like every single person was excited about the Amherst Uprising, right? There were people who thought it was a waste of time. if you look at how the media covered it, it was really negative. And that I remember being an eye opening experience of like reading about what people think is happening on our campus versus being there the whole time and knowing that it was really about something else than the way people talked about it. Like it was about talking about the challenges that had gone unacknowledged and thinking about what can we do to be better and acknowledging that we need to have these conversations. I think that was a big part of it. And so I'm going to be holding the school accountable of like, we've created this really diverse community
Right.
and let's make sure we're prioritizing inclusion and people not feeling that the school had done enough to do that. And I think that's a very fair point to make that, it in some ways is easier to get a diverse group of students to campus. You bring in new students every year, but the structure of the school takes longer to change. The way classes are taught, the way support is built on campus, the way people know how to have conversations when they've been here for 20, 30 plus years.
Right.
Um, that doesn't refresh every year on its own. So, yeah, it was a tense time. And I think there were people who walked out of it very frustrated too, right? Like, as we've had these voices heard and people haven't always felt validated enough, right? Or people hear an incredibly passionate story and it doesn't move them. They think it's just something that's not important. So that was a big part of Amherst Uprising as well, where people, who were trying to create an idea of what we can do moving forward. Of like, let's make a list of things that we can demand of the school, and um, those demands weren't quite met as a like, okay, check this off the list. I think to the school's credit, they've done a lot of work at looking big picture of what can we do long term, and there's still a lot of work to be done. But there are people who wanted those things to happen right away,
Right.
and felt that there were students who were graduating that year who needed those things to happen quickly. And there's a cost to not doing them right then. And as we know from being here, the school moves at a slower pace than we like a lot of times, right? We like to think and talk things through, which has its good sides and has its downsides. And when you're here for 4 years as a student, your time is limited. And so, yeah, there's a lot of positive conversation that came from Amherst Uprising. I think the school is definitely a better place today as a result of it. But I'm sure there's other people who were there in that room who didn't really feel those effects the same way. I do know it felt different walking around campus afterwards. That what people's idea of what it meant to be an Amherst College student changed that day. I think that would probably be the case for every single person on this campus, whether they were there in that room or just heard about it, whether they were really affected by what was being shared or shared themselves, or were dismissive of it in a disappointing way. I think that every person kind of reevaluated what it meant to be an Amherst College student and what this school meant as a result of that, which I think is really powerful. I think that that's something that I don't know if that's ever happened to that degree recently. I'm sure in the past there's time that that's happened. Um, but to walk around the campus after that, realizing like something had changed, that we weren't going to be able to go back from that, and that was important. And what it was going to mean, we didn't really know.
Right.
We still are figuring out what the legacy of it is, but yeah, it's hard to understate the importance of those couple of days.